Hello, I'm Valerie Reid, and tonight I have two ghostly tales for you. The first is a fairly well-known poem by Alfred Noyes, and you will find that the language is as haunting as the story. It's called The Highwayman. The wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. He'd a French cocked hat on his forehead, a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of the claret velvet, and breeches of brown doeskin. They fitted with never a wrinkle. His boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jeweled twinkle. His pistol butts a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle, under the jeweled sky. Over the cobbles he clattered and clashed in the dark inn yard, and he tapped with his whip on the shutters, but all was locked and barred. He whistled a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. And dark in the old inn yard, a stable wicket creaked, where Tim the ostler listened. His face was white and peaked. His eyes were hollows of madness, his hair like moldy hay. But he loved the landlord's daughter, the landlord's red-lipped daughter. Dumb as a dog he listened, and he heard the robber say, "One kiss, my bonny sweetheart. I'm after a prize tonight, but I shall be back with the yellow gold before the morning light. Yet if they press me sharply and harry me through the day, then look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." He rose upright in the stirrups. He scarce could reach her hand, but she loosed her hair in the casement. His face burnt like a brand, as the black cascade of perfume came tumbling over his breast, and he kissed its waves in the moonlight. Oh, sweet black waves in the moonlight. Then he tugged at his rein in the moonlight and galloped away to the west. He did not come in the dawning. He did not come at noon. And out of the tawny sunset, before the rise of the moon, when the road was a gypsy's ribbon looping the purple moor, a redcoat troop came marching, marching, marching. King George's men came marching up to the old inn door. They said no word to the landlord. They drank his ale instead, but they gagged his daughter and bound her to the foot of her narrow bed. Two of them knelt at her casement with muskets at their side. There was death at every window, and hell at one dark window, for Bess could see through the casement the road that he would ride. They had tied her up to attention with many a sniggering jest. They bound a musket beside her with the barrel beneath her breast. "Now keep good watch," and they kissed her. She heard the dead man say, "Look for me by moonlight. Watch for me by moonlight. I'll come to thee by moonlight, though hell should bar the way." She twisted her hands behind her, but all the knots held good. She writhed her hands till her fingers were wet with sweat or blood. They stretched and strained in the darkness, and the hours crawled by like years, till now, on the stroke of midnight, cold on the stroke of midnight, the tip of one finger touched it. The trigger, at least, was hers. The tip of one finger touched it. She strove no more for the rest. Up she stood up to attention, with the barrel beneath her breast. She would not risk their hearing. She would not strive again, for the road lay bare in the moonlight, blank and bare in the moonlight, and the blood of her veins in the moonlight throbbed to her love's refrain. Tlot, 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 tlot. Had they heard it? The horse hoofs ringing clear? Tlot, 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 tlot. In the distance? Were they deaf that they did not hear? Down the ribbon of moonlight, over the brow of the hill, the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The redcoats looked to their priming. She stood up straight and still. Tlot, tlot in the frosty silence, tlot, tlot in the echoing night. Nearer he came and nearer. Her face was like a light. Her eyes grew wide for a moment. She drew one last deep breath. Then her finger moved in the moonlight. Her musket shattered the moonlight, shattered her breast in the moonlight, and warned him with her death. He turned, he spurred to the west. He did not know who stood, bowed with her head o'er the musket, drenched with her own red blood. Not till the dawn he heard it. His face grew gray to hear how Bess, the landlord's daughter, the landlord's black-eyed daughter, had watched for her love in the moonlight and died in the darkness there. Back he spurred like a madman, shrieking a curse to the sky, with the white road smoking behind him and his rapier brandished high. Blood red were his spurs in the golden noon, wine red was his velvet coat, when they shot him down on the highway, down like a dog on the highway. And he lay in his blood on the highway, with a bunch of lace at his throat. And still of a winter's night, they say, when the wind is in the trees, when the moon is a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas, when the road is a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, a highwayman comes riding, riding, riding. A highwayman comes riding up to the old inn door. Over the cobbles he clatters and clangs in the dark inn yard, and he taps with his whip on the shutters, but all is locked and barred. He whistles a tune to the window, and who should be waiting there but the landlord's black-eyed daughter, Bess, the landlord's daughter, plaiting a dark red love knot into her long black hair. That's The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. And now my second ghostly tale is a short story, a little-known short story by Shirley Jackson called Showdown. Visitors, if there had ever been any, would have said that the little town of Mansfield was haunted. It didn't look haunted, hidden comfortably away among green hills with its placid houses and cheerful-looking inhabitants. But nevertheless, a visitor, if there had ever been any, would have said that it was definitely haunted. Some notion of this entered Billy Manners' head as he sat on the front porch of his house looking down Mansfield's only street. Billy's father was the storekeeper, school teacher, and preacher in the church on Sundays, and Billy, at 15, felt that he had a responsible place in the community as the son of his prominent father. From his porch, Billy could look down to his father's store where school was held in the back room, and over to the church next door, and then past a few houses to where the hills began again. About 300 people lived in Mansfield, but it took only one to be haunted, and Billy had begun to feel that it was he. Golly, Billy thought, golly, there ought to be some way for a smart guy like me to figure this out. Uneasily, he went into the house and out to the kitchen. He looked at the mail order calendar on the wall, which read July 16th, 1932. That's fine, Billy thought. Saturday. Pop'll still be at the store. Mom is out visiting Mrs. Baxter. I'll go fishing. As though Billy's father had heard this thought, Billy heard his name being called. Billy ran out the front door and saw his father outside the store calling him. Golly, Billy thought, what did I forget to do? Full of apprehension, he hurried down the street to the store. "Billy," his father said as he approached, "your mother wants you to hurry right over to the church and help her clean it out for tomorrow." "Gonna be a good sermon tomorrow, Ray?" old Thad Ruskin called from the end of the porch. "Full of hellfire?" "Pop always preaches good sermons," Billy said with dignity. He detested Thad Ruskin. Everyone in town did. Thad drank. Where he got it, no one knew. Rumor had it that he ran a still up in the hills somewhere, and he had ruined his pretty daughter Susie's romance with Tom Harper, who had subsequently left Mansfield and had not been heard from since. Rumor also had it that Tom Harper had made $1 million in the city and was coming back someday to face down Thad Ruskin and carry off Susie. Susie was still waiting on the off chance. Nowadays, Susie spent all her time at home sewing towels and pretty clothes for her hope chest, while Thad, usually drunk, sat among the loafers in front of the store, repeating over and over that no Tom Harper was going to come into his house and steal off his daughter. Everyone hated Thad, sympathized with Susie, and hoped that Tom Harper would bring his $1 million back to town. "And your mother wants you, first of all, to run over and help Mrs. Baxter get the ladder up from the cellar so she can get down her top row of preserved peaches and see if the cat's had her kittens back there." "Then can I go fishing, Pop?" Billy asked without much hope. Promised me you'd help in the store this afternoon, didn't you?" Billy's father said. "Yes, sir," Billy muttered. As he started despondently across the street to Mrs. Baxter's house, a sudden commotion behind him made him turn. Voices were raised. A stranger was walking down the street. He was a ragged, tired-looking figure. "Looks like he's been walking for 3 days," Billy thought, and he was heading for the store. The loafers on the porch of the store were all standing, old Thad Ruskin well in front, peering at the stranger and murmuring. "Why, it's Tom Harper," Billy thought, "all ragged and poor." Billy stood watching while Tom Harper, it was him, walked up the steps of the porch and stood facing Thad Ruskin. "You ruined my life once, Thad Ruskin," he said. "Now I'm going to finish yours." No one stepped forward to help Thad as Tom Harper went slowly up the steps. But as he closed in on Thad, the old man moved swiftly. "Come back to kill me?" he demanded. And Tom's body slipped to the ground. Ain't nobody that smart. Billy had been hurrying across the street toward Tom for what seemed an eternity. By the time Tom's body lay on the ground, Billy had gotten there and stood peering with the others at the man who was supposed to have made $1 million and who now lay with Thad Ruskin's knife in his chest. "Go call Susie," someone, Thad said. "I want her to see what happens to people who try to cross me." "He's still breathing," Billy's father said. "Here, let's make him more comfortable." Someone had found Susie, who came running over to the store, and she sank down beside Tom's figure on the ground, crying. Tom opened his eyes halfway. "Didn't forget me, did you, Susie?" he whispered. "I won't ever forget you," Susie cried passionately. "And neither will anyone else. They all just stood there and let my father kill you. I'll see that they don't get off easy." "I don't want anyone punished for this," Tom said weakly. "Not even your father. Just don't forget me." "Guess he's dead, Susie," Billy's father said gently. Billy went fishing after that. In the general excitement, it was easy for him to slip away, but he was late for dinner, and as he opened the front door warily, he heard his father's voice from the kitchen calling, "Billy!" Billy went into the kitchen and saw that there was fried ham and applesauce for dinner. He hoped his mother would sneak some up to him later. "You were supposed to help your mother and Mrs. Baxter and then help me in the store, Billy," his father said sternly. "I think you'd just better run along up to bed." Billy turned meekly. It was no more than he had expected. "Pop," he said as he left the kitchen, "Pop, what did they do to Thad Ruskin?" "They're going to settle that tomorrow," his father said, "and I don't want you hanging around the store while we men talk about it either." Billy went upstairs to bed. The excitement of the day, combined with the hot sun and the walking he'd done in the afternoon, had made him tired. He fell asleep before his mother could manage to escape his father's eye and sneak upstairs with a plate of ham and applesauce. It took a few days for Billy to decide that Mansfield was haunted. He never thought about it consciously, but now and then a shadow of a troubling idea seemed to come over him. Like the next morning as he sat on his porch, looking down the street. "Golly," he thought, "golly, there ought to be some way for a smart guy like me to figure this out." Soon after, he went into the kitchen and saw that the date was July 16th, 1932. Billy thought he might go fishing and forget about work, and just then he heard his name being called, and he hurried down the street to where his father was standing in front of the store. "Billy," his father said, "your mother wants you to hurry right over to the church and help her clean it out for tomorrow." Old Thad Ruskin piped up, "Gonna be a good sermon tomorrow, Ray, full of hellfire?" Billy said, "Pop always preaches good sermons." And then his father added, "And your mother wants you first of all to run over and help Mrs. Baxter get the ladder up from the cellar so she can get her top row of preserved peaches down and see if the cat's had her kittens back there." Without hope, Billy asked his father if he could go fishing and was reminded he had agreed to work in the store that afternoon. He started across the street, and then he heard a commotion and turned to see Ragged Tom Harper walking toward the store. Billy watched Tom Harper approach old Thad, and Billy was across the street in time to see Tom fall at Thad's feet. When Susie promised Tom that no one would ever forget him, Billy murmured assent, as did everyone else, and then he went fishing. When he got home late for dinner, his father was angry and sent him to bed without anything to eat, and Billy fell asleep before his mother could sneak him a plate. And the next morning, Billy sat on his front porch and thought about it again. Somehow it always evaded him, the secret of why Mansfield was haunted. Nothing ever happened there, just the same things over and over every day, ever since Billy could remember. Let me see, Billy thought, what happened yesterday? He had gone fishing, he remembered. He had gotten home late for dinner. What else? Probably just fooled around all day, he thought. Was today Saturday? He went in and looked at the calendar. He thought he might go fishing again today. But when Billy ran down to the store after his father called, he found that excitement had really come to Mansfield. He saw Tom Harper, home from the city, try to kill old Thad Ruskin, but Thad killed Tom instead. Billy saw the whole thing. Afterward, he went fishing. The next day, just as Billy was crossing the street to go to Mrs. Baxter's, he thought, something's going to happen in a minute. And something did. The day after that, as he ran across the street to see Tom Harper die, he thought, haven't I done this before? And the next day, he ran down the street in answer to his father's call. He thought, how many millions of times have I done this? It was several 100,000 times anyway, and always on July 16th, 1932. And in all that time, something had been growing in Billy's head. From his first thought as he ran across the street to see Tom Harper's body the first time, that here was something he wasn't going to forget in a hurry. There had grown in him a definite conviction that there was something wrong going on, particularly since he could never remember what he had done the day before. Finally, Billy had a realization. I do these things again and again, he thought one day, running across the street to see Tom Harper die. I bet I've run from Mrs. Baxter's over to the store lots of times for lots of reasons, but I don't remember ever running for anything but to see Tom Harper die. The next thought, of course, was, suppose I don't run across to see Tom Harper. It didn't work. Every time Billy turned around and saw Tom Harper walking up onto the porch to meet Thad Ruskin, he began to run. And he always got across the street just in time to see Tom's body topple to his feet. Suppose I hurry, Billy wondered. He tried to speed himself up crossing the street. With a prodigious effort, he managed to reach the store before Tom had started to fall. Everything else was the same, but Billy had arrived a fraction of a second sooner. He hurried home from fishing a fraction of a second earlier that afternoon, but was still too late for dinner. The next morning, he really tried to hurry. He went into the kitchen a fraction of a second sooner than he felt he ought to. He thought, I'll go fishing. Then he had to wait for his father to call him. He said, Pop always preaches good sermons to Thad Ruskin just as Thad was finishing Hellfire, and he crossed the street in time to see the knife go into Tom's breast. He was still late for dinner, though. He entered his house, knew his father was sitting at the kitchen table eating ham and applesauce, and went right on upstairs. He had just reached the top of the stairs when he heard his father begin. You were supposed to help your mother and Mrs. Baxter. All this time, Billy didn't quite know what he was doing. He was still going on with the same motions every day, but his doubt, something that made him know the whole business was fishy, also made him go faster. After 3 or 4 days of speeding up, he was beginning to arrive at the store several seconds before his father stepped out front and called Billy. He was answering Thad Ruskin's remark before Thad said it. He was beginning to remember more, too, when he heard his own voice saying, "Pop always preaches good sermons to thin air," and then a minute later heard Thad Ruskin's remark. Billy was beginning to realize what was going on. By this time, he had managed to get across the street in time to walk up the store steps with Tom Harper and stand next to him as the knife went in. The idea was coming to Billy, but it was vague. It finally materialized into a strange thought one morning as he sat on his front porch. If I should see a murder somewhere, he thought suddenly, and if I could be there in time, what I should do is step between the two guys and grab for the knife. The end.